I never imagined the day I'd see my billionaire grandfather, William Carter, the man whose name built half of this city, sitting in the middle of our family's laughter, stripped of his pride. His silver hair, once his quiet symbol of wisdom, was gone, shaved clean. Red marks dotted his scalp like scars of betrayal. The guests chuckled awkwardly, but my parents laughed loudest. "It's just a joke, Dad. Don't be so serious," my mother said between gulps of champagne. My father grinned, soaking in the attention. But when Grandpa's trembling hand reached up to adjust his cap, his eyes glistened not with anger, but humiliation. I felt something in me snap. My name is Emily Carter, and that night, my family's laughter became the sound of something breaking. Trust, love, maybe even our name. They thought it was harmless, fun. They had no idea what I would reveal soon after. The Carter estate shimmered under golden chandeliers that night, every corner polished to perfection. My mother, Linda, had spent weeks planning my father's 50th birthday party, silk tablecloths, a live jazz band, and a guest list full of business partners eager to please. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a performance, a show of success. But as the night unfolded, something felt off. My father, Richard Carter, was all smiles, shaking hands, raising glasses, while my mother floated around in her sequin dress, making sure everyone saw her as the Queen of Carter Industries. And then, right when the music softened and people turned toward the grand staircase, he appeared. Grandpa William. He descended the steps slowly, his cane tapping against the marble, his tailored suit immaculate as always. But it wasn't his clothes that made everyone go silent. It was his head, completely bald. His scalp was freshly shaven, dotted with faint red cuts. At first, people thought it was some kind of statement, maybe a charity gesture, maybe illness. But before anyone could speak, my mother laughed loud, shrill, like a glass cracking in the silence. "Oh my God, Dad, you actually did it," she said, clutching her champagne flute. "I told you it would make you look younger." Laughter followed, hesitant at first, then stronger as my father joined in. "It's the new trend," he added, patting Grandpa's shoulder. "Billionaires everywhere are doing it." Grandpa smiled faintly, but said nothing. His eyes flicked around the room, searching for something, maybe a hint of decency, maybe an escape. I stood frozen by the buffet table, my stomach twisting. The man who once commanded boardrooms, who carried himself with quiet dignity, now looked small and exposed under the party lights. I rushed over, taking his arm gently. "Grandpa, let's sit down. You don't look well." Before he could respond, Mom's voice sliced through the air. "Emily, stop being so dramatic. It's just hair, not a funeral." The guests laughed again, unsure which side to take. Grandpa's hand tightened around his cane. "It's all right, dear," he said softly, his voice steady but distant. "Your mother's right. I'm just tired." I led him to a corner chair anyway, away from the laughter. I noticed a small nick near his ear, as if someone had done it in haste, without care. He kept his gaze on the floor while the rest of the family danced, toasted, and carried on as if nothing had happened. Every now and then, my parents looked over and smirked, proud of their little joke. But behind Grandpa's faint smile, I saw something deeper, the quiet heartbreak of a man realizing that the family he built no longer respected him. When the night finally ended, the floor was littered with confetti and half-empty glasses. I offered to drive him home, but he shook his head. "No need, Emily," he said quietly, buttoning his coat. "I've learned what I needed to tonight." He left without saying goodbye to anyone. My parents didn't even notice. As I watched him disappear into the cold night, something inside me burned a promise forming in the silence. They called it a joke, but I knew it was the beginning of something much bigger. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, glinting off the rows of empty wine glasses and half-eaten cake. My parents were already seated at the counter, Mom scrolling through her phone, Dad nursing a cup of black coffee. Their laughter from the night before still seemed to hang in the air, thick and sour. "Morning, sweetheart," Mom said without looking up. "You were a bit tense last night, weren't you?" Everyone noticed. "Tense?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "You shaved Grandpa's head and humiliated him in front of everyone." Mom blinked, then laughed. "Oh, Emily, Don't be so sensitive. It was just a prank. He even smiled. He smiled because he was ashamed. I snapped. Do you realize what that looked like? People thought he was sick. Dad folded the newspaper and sighed. You're exaggerating. Your grandpa's tougher than you think. He's been through worse. I stared at them both, two people who had built their entire lives around his money, now pretending the night's cruelty was some harmless joke. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn. As I walked toward the door, Mom called after me. Oh, and don't tell anyone about this drama, okay? We have an image to protect. That word image echoed in my head as I drove across town to Grandpa's mansion. When the butler opened the door, the smell of cedarwood and old books wrapped around me like a memory. Grandpa was sitting on the veranda, wearing a soft gray sweater and a flat cap that hid his bald scalp. He looked smaller, older, but his eyes were still sharp. Emily, he greeted me with a faint smile. You came early. I had to, I said, sitting beside him. Grandpa, why didn't you stop them? Why let them do that to you? He took a slow sip of tea before answering. Because sometimes, my dear, silence reveals more than words ever could. I frowned. What do you mean? He turned to me, his gaze steady. I spent my life building this family, the business, the wealth, the legacy, but lately, I've been wondering if I built it on greed instead of love. He looked out toward the garden. Last night confirmed a few things. My throat tightened. You mean Mom and Dad? He smiled sadly. I'm old, Emily, not blind. They see me as a wallet that still breathes. But you still see me as a person. That's rare. I wanted to speak, to defend my parents, but the words caught in my chest, because deep down, I knew he was right. After a long silence, Grandpa stood, resting his hand gently on my shoulder. Don't worry, child. Let them laugh. Life has a way of returning every deed to its sender. I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but something in his tone made my heart race. It wasn't bitterness, it was certainty. Before I left, he handed me a small envelope, sealed with wax, and marked with his initials. Keep this safe, he said. Open it only when the time feels right. As I drove home, I glanced at it lying on the seat beside me. For the first time, I felt that this wasn't just about embarrassment or pride. Something much larger was unfolding, and my parents had no idea they'd just started a war they couldn't win. In the weeks that followed, my parents' attitude toward Grandpa changed overnight. Suddenly, they were visiting him every other day, armed with freshly baked pies, expensive wine, and fake smiles. Mom started calling him Dad again instead of William, her voice dripping with false sweetness. One evening, I overheard them whispering in the living room, their voices low but sharp enough to cut through the silence. We need to fix this, Mom hissed. He's been acting cold ever since that stupid party. If he changes the will now, we're screwed. Relax, Dad muttered. He's just sulking. Once he realizes he needs us, he'll come around. I stood frozen behind the wall, my heart pounding. He doesn't need you. I wanted to shout. You need him. When they noticed me standing there, Mom's smile flickered. Eavesdropping now? She said lightly. You've been spending too much time with your grandpa, Emily. Don't let him fill your head with nonsense. But her tone betrayed her a tremor of fear beneath the arrogance. That weekend, I went to visit Grandpa again. His mansion was quiet, almost too quiet. He greeted me with a calm smile, yet I could see something stirring behind his eyes. Not sadness, but intent. He poured me tea and said, Your parents have been visiting quite a lot lately. I hesitated. They're worried about you, he chuckled softly. Worried about me, or worried about losing what they think is theirs. I lowered my gaze. There was nothing I could say to defend them anymore. He leaned forward, his voice softer now. Emily, do you remember what I taught you about value? Yes, I replied quietly. That money doesn't reveal character, it exposes it. He smiled faintly. Good. Keep remembering that. Then he handed me another envelope smaller, newer, and placed it carefully into my palm. Keep this with the first one, he said. You'll understand soon. I tried to ask what it was, but he only added, Patience, my dear. Truth takes time. Later that week, my parents hosted a dinner at our house. They were all charm and laughter again, bragging to friends about how close they'd become with Grandpa lately. "He's finally starting to relax," Dad said. "The old man even said he might make some changes to the estate." Everyone laughed. Except me. I noticed how Mom's eyes gleamed when she said the word estate. After the guests left, I confronted her. "Why are you pretending to care?" Mom turned, her smile vanishing. "Because that's what adults do, Emily. We play the game. You think your moral speeches matter in this world? They don't pay the bills." "You humiliated him," I said, voice trembling. "And now you're pretending it never happened." Her tone turned icy. "Don't lecture me about right and wrong. You'll understand when you have something to lose." I wanted to scream, but instead, I left the house, driving aimlessly through the night until I ended up in front of Grandpa's gate again. He was on the porch, as if expecting me. "They showed their hand already, didn't they?" he asked gently. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "They only care about the money." Grandpa reached out, holding my hand firmly. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "it's time they learn what happens when they laugh at the wrong man." His tone sent chills down my spine. It wasn't anger. It was resolve, the kind that meant something big was about to happen. 2 weeks later, my mother decided to host yet another party this time. A small family dinner to, as she said, smooth things over. But I knew better. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control. She wanted to prove she could still command attention and Grandpa's respect like nothing had ever happened. The house sparkled again with the same artificial charm. Crystal glasses, white roses, waiters in black ties. My father moved through the crowd, laughing too loudly at his own jokes, while Mom greeted guests like a politician on election day. I stood near the entrance, waiting for Grandpa. A part of me hoped he wouldn't come, but right on time, his black limousine rolled up to the driveway. He stepped out slowly, cane in hand, wearing a dark suit and that same hat that hid what was left of his hair. When he entered the room, the music dimmed, and all eyes turned to him. My father clapped his hands. "Everyone, let's welcome the man who made this family possible, the legend himself, William Carter." Applause followed, hesitant and shallow. Grandpa smiled politely, shaking hands as people congratulated him, but I could see the stiffness in his posture. He wasn't there to celebrate. He was there to confront something. Halfway through dinner, Mom raised her glass. "Dad," she said loudly, "I know we've had our little misunderstandings lately. But we're family, right? Family forgives." Guests murmured in agreement. Grandpa's hand tightened around his glass. "Family," he repeated softly, "is built on respect." The air grew heavy. My father laughed to cut the tension. "Oh, come on, Dad. Don't take things so seriously. You've got everything anyone could want. Wealth, comfort, health." "Not everything," Grandpa interrupted. His voice was low, but it sliced through the noise like a blade. "A man can lose his fortune and rebuild it, but once he loses his dignity, it's gone forever." The room went still. Mom forced a smile. "Oh, Dad, stop being so dramatic. It was a joke, for heaven's sake. You can't live your life crying over a haircut." He turned his gaze on her, calm, but burning. "You didn't cut my hair, you cut my trust." For a moment, even the jazz band fell silent. Then, my father leaned back, scoffing. "Are we really going to drag this out forever? You're acting like we committed a crime." Grandpa's cane hit the floor with a sharp crack. "Maybe not a crime," he said, "but you showed me exactly what you'd do if I ever became weak." He stood slowly, every eye following him. "You wanted to see how far a joke could go. Now you will." Mom rolled her eyes, pretending to laugh. "Oh, please. Don't start with your lectures again, Dad. You love to make everything a test. It's exhausting." Grandpa didn't answer. He turned to leave, his expression unreadable. But as he passed by me, he whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Emily, when the truth comes out, stand your ground." And then he was gone. The rest of the evening unraveled fast. Guests exchanged nervous glances, murmuring behind their glasses. My parents tried to salvage the mood, but everyone could feel it, the humiliation, the arrogance, the tension boiling beneath their polished smiles. When the last guest left, Mom threw her glass into the sink, shards flying. "He's losing it," she spat. He's trying to turn you against us, Emily. I stared at her, stunned. You don't need his help to do that. Dad's voice thundered behind me. Watch your tone, young lady. But I didn't flinch. You both crossed a line you can't uncross, I said quietly. You took a man's pride and turned it into a party joke. Dad's face turned red. He's old. He needs to learn not everything is about him. Mom folded her arms. You think you're better than us? You're just a child who doesn't understand how the world works? I looked at them, the people who raised me, now strangers behind their masks of entitlement. No, I said, my voice steady. I understand perfectly. You care about money more than people. And soon, you'll find out what that costs. I left before they could answer, heart pounding. The night air felt electric, like the calm before a storm. Somewhere deep down, I knew Grandpa's words weren't just a warning. They were a promise. Something was coming, something that would shatter everything my parents thought they owned. A week later, a thick white envelope arrived at our house sealed with the gold crest of Carter Industries. Mom tore it open, expecting another invitation to one of Grandpa's business galas. Instead, her face drained of color as she read the elegant cursive inside. You are cordially invited to a private announcement at the Carter estate this Friday. Attendance mandatory for family members. Dad frowned. Mandatory? What is he up to now? Mom tried to laugh, but her voice cracked. Probably another lecture. The old man loves his theatrics. I said nothing, but my stomach tightened. Grandpa's words from the last party echoed in my mind. When the truth comes out, stand your ground. Friday came with gray skies and thunder rumbling somewhere in the distance. The atmosphere around the Carter mansion felt different this time, colder, heavier. Only family and a few legal advisors were present. A long mahogany table stretched across the dining hall, and at its head sat Grandpa William, tall and composed, dressed in his usual dark suit. When my parents walked in, he greeted them with a polite nod, nothing more. Please, sit, he said calmly. We have important matters to discuss. Mom tried to keep things light. Dad, you didn't need to summon us like this. You could have just called. Grandpa didn't smile. I've tried calling for years, Linda. You just never listened. Dad cleared his throat. Let's just get to the point. What's this about? Grandpa placed a folder on the table. It's about what truly belongs to this family and who's proven they deserve it. Mom's eyes flickered. You're not talking about the company, are you? He opened the folder slowly, revealing pages stamped and notarized. For the last few months, I've been reviewing my estate, my will, my legacy. Dad leaned forward. And? Grandpa looked straight at them, his tone calm but sharp as glass. I realized I cannot leave billions to people who find cruelty amusing, to those who mistake humiliation for humor and greed for love. Mom's face turned pale. What are you saying? I'm saying, he continued, that effective immediately, Carter Industries, my real estate holdings, and all associated assets are being transferred to Emily Carter. The room exploded. Mom shot up from her chair. What? Dad slammed his palm on the table. This is ridiculous. She's a child. She can't run an empire. Grandpa stayed seated, unbothered. She doesn't have to run it yet, but she'll have the means to protect what you tried to destroy dignity. I froze. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Grandpa, I don't... He turned to me, his expression softening. Emily, open the envelope I gave you. My hands trembled as I reached into my bag and pulled out the wax-sealed envelope he'd given me weeks ago. I broke the seal. Inside were several documents, legal transfers, share certificates, and one handwritten note. For the one who remembered respect, when everyone else forgot. I looked up, tears filling my eyes. Grandpa. Mom was shaking now, her voice high and shrill. You manipulated him, didn't you? You've been poisoning his mind against us. Dad's tone turned dark. We took care of you when no one else would. You owe us. Grandpa's cane struck the floor, the sound echoing like thunder. Enough. The room fell silent. His voice, though trembling, carried the force of decades of authority. I owe you nothing, he said slowly. I gave you a chance to show love. Instead, you showed me greed. You humiliated me, laughed at me, treated me like a joke. You thought my silence meant weakness. He turned to me, his eyes soft again. But Emily? She listened. She saw the man, not the money. Mom's lips trembled. Dad, please. You can't just cut us out. We were stupid, okay? We made a mistake. We'll apologize. An apology means nothing when it comes after the inheritance, Grandpa said coldly. You laughed when I was stripped of my dignity. Now you'll learn what it feels like to be stripped of comfort. Tears rolled down Mom's cheeks. Please, don't do this. We're family. Grandpa's voice softened, but there was no hesitation. Family isn't a title, it's a choice. And you chose money over me. Dad stood, furious. You're ruining this family. Grandpa's reply was calm, final. No, Richard. You already did. As the lawyers confirmed the legalities, the sound of pen scratching paper filled the air, quiet, cold, irreversible. I sat motionless, torn between heartbreak and awe. When the signing was done, Grandpa handed me the final document. Everything's in your name now, he said. It's yours to protect. My mother collapsed back into her chair, sobbing silently. My father stared blankly at the floor, his face drained of color. Grandpa rose slowly, leaning on his cane. Now, he said quietly, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to spend the evening with the only person in this room who still remembers what love looks like. He turned to me. Emily, shall we go? I nodded, unable to speak. As we walked out together, I heard Mom's voice behind me, broken, desperate. Please, give us another chance. But Grandpa didn't look back. They had their chance, he murmured. Now it's yours. Outside, the rain had started to fall soft, cleansing, relentless. Grandpa looked up at the gray sky, then smiled faintly. You see, Emily, he said, some storms aren't meant to destroy. They're meant to wash everything clean. And in that moment, I understood this wasn't revenge. It was restoration. The night they shaved his head, they thought they'd humiliated a powerless old man. But tonight, he'd shown them what true power looked like. Quiet, deliberate, and just. The next morning, every major financial newspaper carried the same headline: Billionaire William Carter transfers. Entire fortune to granddaughter. The photo beneath it showed Grandpa and me walking out of the mansion side by side, he, in his black coat and hat, me holding his arm as flashbulbs exploded around us. By noon, the story had gone viral. Pundits praised his bold moral stand, while gossip columns speculated about the family scandal of the decade. For my parents, it was a nightmare. Mom's phone buzzed endlessly with calls from friends and reporters. At first, she tried to laugh it off. It's exaggerated, she said to anyone who'd listen. Dad's just reorganizing things. He'll fix it soon. But when her credit cards were declined at a boutique the next day, reality hit. Grandpa had already revoked every allowance, every fund, every connection they'd built their lives on. I found out later that the mansion they lived in wasn't even theirs, it had always belonged to Grandpa's trust. Within a week, the lawyers arrived with a notice. They had 30 days to vacate. I didn't see them until they showed up at the gates of the Carter estate, looking nothing like the glamorous hosts from the party weeks ago. Dad's suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. Mom wore oversized sunglasses, her hands shaking. The security guard called me. Miss Carter, your parents are here. Should I let them in? I hesitated, my chest tight. Yes, I said finally. When they entered, the first thing I noticed was their silence. Mom didn't look at me. Dad's eyes darted toward Grandpa, who sat calmly in his study, reading the morning paper. Dad! Mom's voice broke. We just want to talk. He folded the newspaper neatly before speaking. Now you want to talk. Please, she said, her voice trembling. We made a mistake. We were stupid, cruel. We didn't mean to hurt you. Grandpa's eyes softened slightly, but his tone stayed steady. You meant to laugh. You meant to make me small. You only regret it now, because the cost finally came due. Dad took a step forward. Can't you just, I don't know, fix this? The media's tearing us apart. We can't even go out without cameras following us. Grandpa looked at him with quiet disbelief. You're worried about the cameras? I was humiliated by my own children in front of our family and the world. But you're worried about image. Mom burst into tears. Dad, please. We can change. We'll do anything. Just give us another chance. The words hung in the air, For a moment, I thought Grandpa might give in, but he didn't. He rose slowly, resting on his cane. I already gave you one, he said gently, and you turned it into mockery. Then, his gaze shifted toward me. Emily, what do you think? My heart twisted. I looked at them, my parents broken, desperate, stripped of everything but guilt. For a second, I saw the echoes of the people who once tucked me in at night, but then I remembered Grandpa's face that night at the party, the forced smile, the shaking hands, the red marks on his scalp. I took a deep breath. I think forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, I said quietly. You taught me that, Grandpa. He nodded approvingly. Then let's not forget. Mom wiped her tears. So, that's it? You're really cutting us off? Grandpa's expression softened but didn't waver. No. I'm setting you free. Free to build your own life. Without my money to guide you. Maybe then you'll understand what really matters. Dad clenched his fists, but his voice cracked. And what about Emily? You're turning her into you cold, calculating. Grandpa smiled faintly. No, Richard. I'm teaching her the difference between strength and cruelty. He turned away, dismissing them with quiet finality. You'll have one last payment from the trust, enough to start over. After that, you're on your own. Mom's shoulders shook as she whispered, We don't deserve this. He looked back at her. You're right, he said softly. You don't deserve this, the wealth, the luxury. You deserve a chance to earn your own redemption. They left without another word. I stood at the window, watching their car disappear down the long driveway. The storm that had been brewing for weeks had finally passed, leaving silence in its wake. Not peace, but clarity. Grandpa turned to me. Do you hate them? I hesitated. No, I pity them. Because they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to buy back what they threw away. He smiled sadly. Then you understand more than most adults ever do. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. This wasn't about money, Emily. It was about respect. And you can't inherit that, you can only earn it. Outside, the rain started again. Slow, steady, cleansing. For the first time in years, Grandpa looked lighter, almost peaceful. Let them rebuild, he said softly. Maybe one day, when they finally learn to laugh without cruelty, they'll be worthy of being called family again. And as thunder rumbled in the distance, I realized something profound. Justice wasn't always loud or vengeful. Sometimes, it was quiet, firm, and heartbreakingly human. The weeks after that storm were quieter than I'd ever known them to be. The media frenzy faded, the gossip died down, and the world slowly moved on to its next scandal. But inside the Carter estate, something beautiful was beginning to grow. Peace. Grandpa started spending more time in the sunroom, where the morning light painted the walls gold. He looked healthier, calmer, almost younger. I made it a routine to bring him tea at exactly 7 every morning. He'd sit with his newspaper while I answered emails from the office. For the first time in my life, our conversations weren't rushed or interrupted by phone calls or dinner parties. They were simply ours. One morning, as he watched the sunrise, he said softly, You know, Emily, I don't miss the noise. What noise? I asked, placing his tea beside him. The kind that comes from people pretending to care, he said with a faint smile. Real love doesn't shout. It listens. I didn't answer right away. His words hung in the air like a truth I had always known but never named. After the chaos of the inheritance and my parents' departure, Grandpa and I had built a new rhythm. We cooked together, laughed at old black and white comedies, and sometimes went out for quiet walks in the garden. I planted daisies along the stone path, his favorite flowers, he told me. They remind me of your grandmother, he said once. Simple, but impossible not to notice. Every evening, he'd tell me stories from his youth, not about money or success, but about mistakes. People think being a billionaire means you're smart, he said, but most of the time, it just means you've made more mistakes and had enough money to fix them. He chuckled softly, then turned to me. Promise me something, Emily. Anything, I said. When I'm gone, don't build your life around protecting what I gave you. Build it around why I gave it to you. I frowned. What do you mean? He leaned back, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the lamp. Because kindness is an investment too. It pays back in ways you can't measure. Protect that, not the money. I nodded, but something about his tone, calm, almost final, made my throat tighten. That weekend, Grandpa decided to visit the company headquarters for the first time since the transfer. Just one last walk through the empire, he joked. But when we entered the building, something incredible happened. The employees stood, one by one, clapping quietly. No press, no cameras, just genuine respect. An older secretary approached him and said, "Mr. Carter, thank you for reminding us what this company was built on." He smiled humbly. "It was never built on money," he replied. "It was built on people." I'll never forget the look in their eyes, admiration, not fear. That day, I finally understood what Grandpa had meant when he said dignity couldn't be bought. It had to be lived. As the months passed, our relationship deepened into something sacred. He became my compass, and I became his shadow, walking with him through the garden, listening to his soft hum of old jazz tunes. But age, inevitable and cruel, began to show its weight. His steps grew slower, his naps longer. One afternoon, I found him sitting by the window, staring out at the garden where the daisies had bloomed in full. He looked at me, his eyes gentle but distant. "Emily," he whispered, "when I go, don't mourn too long. I've lived enough for 3 lifetimes. Just promise me you'll keep laughing but never at someone else's pain." I took his hand. "I promise," I said, though tears blurred my vision. He smiled faintly. "Good. That's how you keep the Carter name alive, not in fortune, but in kindness." That night, as I tucked him into bed, he reached out, squeezing my hand one last time. "You did well, Emily," he murmured. "You turned humiliation into honor. Don't ever lose that." "I won't, Grandpa," I whispered. His breathing slowed, steady, and peaceful. I sat by his bedside until dawn broke through the curtains, painting his face in the softest gold. And though I didn't know it then, that would be the last sunrise we'd share. The following morning, the world lost a billionaire. But I lost my hero. When the doctor confirmed he'd passed in his sleep, I felt a hollow ache I couldn't describe. Yet, even through the tears, there was a strange comfort because he'd left exactly as he lived, quietly, with grace. The mansion felt different without him, but the daisies he'd loved swayed gently in the wind, as if whispering his favorite line. "Some storms don't destroy, they cleanse." And as I stood in that garden, I realized he hadn't just left me a fortune. He'd left me a legacy, a lesson that true wealth doesn't glitter. It grows. The funeral was held under a soft gray sky, the kind of day where the clouds hung low but gentle, as if the heavens themselves were bowing in respect. The Carter Estate's garden, once filled with laughter and ambition, was now wrapped in silence. Rows of white daisies lined the path to the marble headstone that bore his name. William Carter, 1939, 2025. He built empires, but his greatest legacy was love. Dozens of people came, former employees, old friends, even competitors who had once tried to outsmart him. But 2 faces stood out among the crowd. My parents. They looked nothing like the glamorous power couple they used to be. My father's once perfect suit hung loose, and my mother's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling as she held a small bouquet of wilted roses. They didn't stand near the front, just watched from the edge of the garden, quiet and hollow. When the ceremony ended, most people came to hug me, offering polite condolences. "He was a great man," they said. "He'll be remembered." But I didn't want his memory to be great. I wanted it to be true. After everyone left, I stayed behind, sitting on the cold stone bench beside his grave. The wind rustled the daisies, carrying the faint scent of rain. For a long time, I said nothing. Then, softly, I whispered, "You did it, Grandpa. You fixed what they broke." A voice broke the stillness behind me. "Emily." I turned. My mother stood there, fragile, her makeup barely hiding the exhaustion etched into her face. My father lingered a few steps behind, his jaw tight. I didn't move. She took a hesitant step forward. "We just wanted to say, we're sorry." I swallowed hard. Sorry for what? The laughter? The greed? The years you treated him like a burden? Her lips trembled. "We were stupid, Emily. We thought We thought his money would always be there. We never realized how small we looked until we lost everything. Dad's voice, once booming and proud, was now barely a whisper. He was right. About everything. The anger I'd carried for months began to crack, but not because I forgave them, because I finally understood something Grandpa had said once. Forgiveness isn't for them. It's for your peace. I looked down at the daisies. He forgave you, you know, I said quietly. He just didn't trust you anymore. There's a difference. Mom nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. We know, and we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to earn back what we lost. For the first time, her words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded real fragile, human. I stood, brushing the dirt from my hands. If you really mean that, I said softly, then start by living the way he taught you honestly. No shortcuts, no lies. Just decency. They both nodded, saying nothing more. As they turned to leave, I felt something heavy lift from my chest, not forgiveness, but closure. In the months that followed, life slowly reshaped itself. I took over Carter Industries, not as a cold executive, but as the kind of leader Grandpa had always been, the kind who knew every janitor by name and still wrote handwritten thank you notes to his employees. The company changed its slogan from "Built for Power" to "Built with Purpose." Every decision I made, I imagined Grandpa standing beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "Do it with kindness, Emily," he'd whisper in my memory. "Money fades, character doesn't." I set up a foundation in his name, the Carter Legacy Fund, to support small family businesses, the kind of people he always said deserved a fighting chance. It was my way of continuing what he started, not with billions, but with belief. The media called it a redemption story. Investors called it a bold rebrand. But for me, it was something simpler. It was healing. One evening, months later, I visited the garden again. The daisies had bloomed wildly, white petals glowing under the setting sun. I sat by his headstone with a cup of tea, chamomile, his favorite. "I think you'd like what we've done," I said aloud, smiling faintly. "The company's thriving again, but this time for the right reasons. And Mom and Dad," I hesitated. "They're trying." They moved into a small house downtown. Mom volunteers at a community kitchen now. Dad's helping local startups. Maybe they're learning. The wind picked up, and a single daisy petal drifted onto my lap. I laughed softly. "Yeah, I know. You'd say it's about time." As the last rays of sunlight stretched across the garden, I felt something warm settle in my chest, not grief, but gratitude. He hadn't just left me an empire, he'd left me a compass, a way to live. That night, as I walked back toward the mansion, I looked up at the sky, where the clouds had finally cleared. Stars glittered faintly above the city skyline that bore his name, Carter Tower, glowing golden against the dark. For the first time, I didn't feel small beneath it. I felt guided, because Grandpa hadn't just restored dignity to our family, he'd redefined it. He showed me that real wealth isn't measured in zeros, but in moments, the quiet ones, where you choose respect over ridicule, love over power. And though the world would remember William Carter as the billionaire who changed his will in one shocking night, I would remember him as something far greater, the man who taught me how to keep my soul unshaven.